Hi, Jada. Thank you so much for coming today to interview about your experience. My name is Craig. I am an undergrad at Harvard, where I study neuroethics by chance. So, really excited to have you here. So, to start, could you provide a brief introduction of yourself and what you specialize in?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Jada Wiggleton-Little. I am a current neuroethics fellow at the Cleveland Clinic, and I also have a position in the philosophy department at The Ohio State University. And I primarily work on pain ethics. So looking at kind of the disparities that we see with people of color and women when it comes to pain acknowledgement and pain management.
Okay, wow. The idea of pain ethics and epistemic injustices is really interesting. Before we delve into that, could you talk about your journey that led you to this position of looking into neuroethics, pain ethics, and being a professor essentially?
Yeah, sure. I think it's one of those situations where, how one moment in your life kind of
Yeah.
leads to a serious a moment.
Yeah,
I think when I got to undergrad, like most undergrad students, I was like, yes, medicine, MD, doctor,
exactly.
all the way. And then I found myself kind of sitting in on philosophy classes and then taking philosophy classes. And there was always this line of philosophy that stuck with me where they said, if you believe you're in pain, then you're in pain.
Mm,
I don't know why. I mean, I grew up with a chronic pain condition myself. And so to hear a statement like that felt very validating. And so that's
hmm.
when I realized I was like, philosophy and philosophy of mind and ethics have things to
Yeah.
contribute to this conversation. So I was always taking some neuroscience classes on the side, philosophy of mind classes. I had a professor who was a mentor of mine. She taught a neuroethics class, a bioethics class. And that's when I realized all these worlds could connect philosophy, neuroscience, medicine. And then I had to think about, well, what do I want to do next? And
Hmm.
there's a lot of options. Could still go to medical school, could go to law school, could do a graduate degree in philosophy. And I realized I was like, yeah, I love the idea of teaching as well, of seeing change, not just in medicine and that individual patient provider level,
Hmm.
only in like policies and things that could help generate, but also how do we inspire and change the conversation about pain for the future healthcare providers, for the future lawyers, right? For the future politicians. So I really love this idea of kind of being able to do medical research and clinical research and shape the policy aspect, but also wanted to do a PhD so that I can be in the classroom and
Hmm.
maybe inspire other students like the professor who was a mentor to me. So that's kind of how I got there. And then I was always looking for kind of visiting scholar positions or fellowship positions that
Hmm.
allowed me to get that hands-on training while I was in grad school. So taking classes, but also doing online positions with like a hospital in DC, working with organizations like Hastings Center, who was really
Hmm.
giving me career advice of how to get into this this kind of relatively new field of bioethics and neuroethics, and then now being here at the Cleveland Clinic.
Hmm. Could you elaborate on what you do now? Like, how does your day-to-day look?
Sure, yeah. So I must admit, I'm still pretty new to my position. I've been at the Cleveland Clinic for a month now. But I think I do a bit of kind of research, some clinical ethics shadowing, because bioethics is so broad. So I wanted to do a bit
Yes,
of,
yes.
yeah, like pain research, some clinical ethics shadowing. And then I'm also a ethics ethicist on the Cleveland Clinic brain study, which is
Hmm.
fascinating. So
Hmm.
their goal is to be the kind of biggest longitudinal brain study ever done,
Oh my
recruit
goodness.
200,000 participants, and we kind of see whether or not, see how the brain change over aging. And so I kind of am part of that conversation of how do we collect this data in a just way? How do we reflect the community needs in this kind of research? So my day looks like sitting in on those meetings, talking to
Mhm.
those participants, kind of generating ways in which we can be truly inclusive
Mhm.
in our research, and then doing some conversation with pain clinicians of what does pain communication look like?
Mhm.
How are you talking to your patients? And so I'm currently working on a research project to see what language are we using to as patients to talk about our pain, and how a healthcare provider is hearing that and seeing if there is this kind of misinterpretation, this
Wow.
systemic misinterpretation, which would fall under that concept of epistemic injustice. And
Mhm.
then, yeah, again, also on the side, just kind of following around the clinical ethicists here and looking at what does clinical ethics look like on the bedside. So I like to keep busy. And I think that's what's great about bioethics. It's so interdisciplinary. There's so many different parts. So I can sit at my desk, which I'm at right now, reading and doing lit reviews about pain. I can follow clinical ethicists around, hear how kind of ethics is done in the hospital, and then being able to contribute into research ethics that's
Mhm.
being done in neuroscience as well. So that's
Wow.
my typical day. Then on the academic side, some talks here or there that I get asked to do.
Okay, awesome. Really interesting how you arrived at your position and then also the different fields that go into it. Could you speak about how you combine like philosophy of mind, epistemology, ethics, and then also neuroscience into what you specialize in? And then how was that journey? How was combining that intersectional field?
Yeah, so pain is weird
Yeah.
in the sense that, we all experience, well, not all, but majority of us experience pain at some point. And pain is something that's been talked about in all these areas in academia, but in isolation, right? Like
Mhm.
philosophy of mind was very interested in what is a pain state, right? What does it mean to be in pain? Is that something of our mind? Is that something of the body? Is it physical? Is it subjective? Those kind of interesting debate questions. And then, medicine is all about how do we treat how do we treat pain, right? Especially in a way that's not leading to this opioid crisis.
Mhm.
And epistemology doesn't really talk about pain. It's talking about just the sharing of knowledge. But there's a lot of conversations in epistemologies of how certain bodies attached to certain social identities are unfairly given less credibility of
Mm.
when they're speaking. And so I became very interested in where everyone's kind of talking about the same problem, that pain is this mysterious subjective experience that's somehow connected to the brain. But we really rely on it in medicine on patient testimony. And then in this epistemology world, there's all this talk about testimony and who's believed and who's not believed. And then
Mhm.
the ethics piece, we notice that there are certain people whose pain is just undermanaged and underdiagnosed systematically, right? And so then I became interested. Okay, let's look at all these puzzle pieces and put them together. And
Yeah.
now we have a very rich story of, I, as a woman of color, come in. I am historically and presently less likely to be believed or more likely to be dismissed, to be
Mhm.
assumed I don't know about my experience. And here comes a clinician whose main source currently, main source of information about my pain is to listen and believe me. And
Mhm.
yeah, interesting clash going on. And then now, especially in neuroscience, this production of neural technologies and this idea that we can find a pain biomarker, that there's some neural signature in the brain that can map into certain chronic pain experience, and whether or not that's going to address these disparities. Are there going to be a way that we can kind of just see pain in a person and have to bypass all this messy, complicated, social things of having to believe the person? So I've gotten very interested in those conversations because I think just picking one box, we don't get the whole picture. Like if I just stayed in neuroscience, yeah, I'm having all this interesting knowledge and creation of neurotechnologies and pain biomarkers, but what's the social ethical implications?
Yeah.
I just stayed in Phil mind in this question of what is pain? What is the nature of pain, right? That's an important question, but funny enough, we as humans have been operating and managing pain and working around pain without ever knowing what pain is this whole time. So
Mhm.
it seems to be something very more specific to this like human to human interaction. And again, if I only stay in a human human interaction, what it is to believe people and
Exactly.
testimonies, we miss that pain is something very unique. It's different than me talking about it's raining outside, because then, yeah, I can point to rain if you don't believe me.
Mhm.
And until technology gets better, which I kind of have my suspicions, but we're able to objectively find the measure of pain, we have no choice but to rely on my word, right?
Mhm.
And so that's where my passion of neuroethics comes in. Again, from my own experience growing up with chronic pain and that feeling of, oh, I have to make people believe me. They can't see it. What is it that I'm experiencing? And you start having these kind of self-doubts. So how can we use neuroethics and all these intersections of disciplines to get to a different result, a result in which I don't know, plot twist.
Yeah.
We believe the patient, right? In a way that's just more just and not based off of the influence of prejudice and bias.
I love how you put it. The way we believe, the way we treat patients, the way we approach patients is more just. Could you elaborate on how your bioethics and your ethics background has shaped how you approach these spaces, how you approach people or patients in general?
I think what bioethics and neuroethics has taught me um, is that, again, it's not one or the other. It's
Yeah.
not just the science and objective, and it's not just the, I don't know, abstract and ideas
Mhm.
and thoughts, right? That you need both. And so I think the way I now approach people, the way I have conversations with patients, is trying to hold both, right? So that's why I think a lot of my hesitancies with this push of having objective ways to do medicine is that we lose the human part. Because bioethics, again, is science and humanities. And so there's ways in which, yes, we have to look at the tests, we have to look at the imaging, we have to, look at the results. And that's going to give us one picture of what it is that the patient or
Mhm.
person is experiencing. But I think and what I try to aim to do is also still hold on to the dignity in the subjective experience of what the person is experiencing, right? What does that feel like to you? What impact does this have on your day-to-day life? How can I truly listen? So reading the results and deeply listening and holding both equally. I don't think one has to plot over the other. And I feel like that's the tools that bioethics and neuroethics gave me,
Wow.
is that I have some kind of training and understanding of the science. I'm by no means, me personally, I'm not a scientist, right? But I know enough of the science to get one side of the picture. And then I start also having this humanities, humanistic part of the other picture. And now it's a bit more clear of how do I treat a person? How do I treat a patient? The treatment target, right? I changed the condition, I fix something, there's surgery, there's pharmaceuticals, but I also just treat the person. I listen, I'm empathetic, I show concern, right? And so I
Mhm.
think that's where my training has given me, is this ability to have to walk into both worlds,
Yeah.
whether I'm reading science and philosophy, I'm writing to a science audience, I'm writing to a philosophical audience, and that's a balancing act in and of itself. And then the individual person, I'm seeing the objective and the subjective, and I'm allowing both to be true, even
Mhm.
if they contradict. And I think that's where people get yucky. They want to pick a side. And I think
Mm.
bioethics and neuroethics is learning we just need them. We need both.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was amazing. Thank you so much, Jada, for your words of wisdom and for sharing your journey. I know that I and others are probably even more inspired to go into neuroethics.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for having me.